Okay, welcome to another flipped lesson. I had to think before I hit record that I think this is flipped lesson number 4, and it just kind of makes me laugh because when I first started this new adventure, I thought, well, I'll flip maybe 2 or 3 before the end of the year and just kind of see how it goes. And we're not even a full week into it, and this is flipped lesson number 4. So I'm really excited about how this is going, and I hope that you're enjoying it. I also got to thinking that you should know where I am when I'm video recording these lessons. The past 3, I've been in the art room before second period starts, so that's a quiet place. And this morning, I'm recording this lesson while you are taking your Terra Nova 3 test, or if you did take the Terra Nova 3 testing. So today, I'm in the library, and it's a beautiful day, and the sun is shining. And I'm sure you're thinking, Miss Finch, I really do not care where you are. Sometimes I've been thinking I might record these at night, but then my family would be hearing me talk about biology, and they don't really want to do that. So I just kind of keep it to myself here at school. Today's lesson is going to be about the 5 classes of vertebrates. The last flip lesson was just over some general characteristics, but today we're going to get into a little bit more detailed about what kind of animals are found in phylum Chordata. There are 5 classes of vertebrates. And all of these classes are going to share these characteristics. They're all going to be eukaryotic. They will all be multicellular. They're all heterotrophs, which means that they have to eat food from someplace else. They don't make their own food. And because they're not plants, none of them have cell walls. Now, these characteristics here are what we covered in the last lesson. So this is just a bit of a review. They all will have a notochord, which is the flexible rod through the body that becomes the cartilage between the vertebrae and vertebrates. They have a dorsal hollow nerve cord, and this eventually becomes their spinal cord. Then they have pharyngeal slits that develop into either gills or the jaw or ear. And then they all have a tail that extends beyond the anus that may actually just be there in kind of the embryonic stage. Several of the animals will actually lose their tail. Okay, so you have a guided note sheet, and some of the questions will have a slide like this that you'll stop and answer. Some of them don't. So you may need to what I would actually advise you to do is pause the video and read ahead all of the different questions. That way you'll know when to hit pause or when to hit rewind so you can get all the notes, because not all of them will have a slide like this. But go ahead and list the 4 characteristics of animals. And you can go back and just write those out, or you can just kind of remember them from what we just said. And list the 4 characteristics of chordates. Now, we talked about that in the last flip lesson. I reviewed it here, so that's probably going to be a good test question. All chordates are vertebrates, with the exception of these 2. These right here are your tunicates, and these right here are your lancelets. They do not have a vertebrate, but they have all of those other characteristics at some point or another, so that puts them in this phylum. Vertebrates have 2 very unique features. They have a skull and a backbone. They have an endoskeleton, which means their skeleton is on the inside. They all have a hinged jaw. In fact, when we dissect the frog next Thursday, we're actually going to have to cut through his jaw so we can look into the mouth of the frog. So he has a hinged jaw that we'll have to kind of break a little bit. And many of them are tetrapods, which means they have 2 sets of limbs. They have a front and a back, or a fore and a hind leg. Now, the further we get into talking about the vertebrates, they're all classified based on either their skin covering, how they reproduce, how they maintain their body temperature, which we're going to talk about today in this lesson, and characteristics of these limbs, whether they be arms and legs or something equivalent like wings or fins. Knowing the 5 classes of vertebrates and their characteristics are going to help you to be able to understand these animals a little bit better. Now, there's a lot of different species in these different classes, but as you can see, birds and fish have the most classes. There are about 30 different species of fish. There's about 10,000 species of birds. When we think about animals, I think probably most of you would come to mind mammals. Mammals would come to your mind when you think about animals. And note that they have the smallest number of species in their class. So let's start with the fish. The fish is the first class that we're going to talk about. They have two-chambered heart. Their blood is pumped from the heart to the gill capillaries, so they can be oxygenated. They do reproduce sexually, but mainly in an external fertilization. An external fertilization means that the female is going to lay the eggs outside of her body, and then the male is going to come along and fertilize them. For fish, this happens in the water. And for thousands of offspring are produced, and there's not a lot of parental care given from the fish mom and dad to the baby fish mom and dad. Some will, but most don't. These are the three classes of fish: the agnatha, which are the jawless fish; the chondriichthyes, which is the cartilaginous fish; and the osteichthyes, the bony fish. For the class agnatha, again, these are your jawless fish. They do not have scales, and this is an example here of a hagfish. The chondriichthyes, these are fish that have flexible skeletons made of cartilage. They do have a hinged jaw with scales. They have paired fins, and examples here are sharks and stingrays. Now, what about the largest fish on Earth? This is the whale shark. The whale shark is the largest fish on Earth. Now, I might ask this like a bonus question on a test, or maybe just a check for understanding to make sure you're listening through the whole video. So this is good information to have. For the class osteichthyes, these are your bony fish. Their skeleton is rigid and composed of calcium. And you have two groups in this class of fish. You have lobed fin and ray finned. The coelacanth pictured here is an example of a lobed fin fish. Now, some major characteristics of osteichthyes is that their gills are covered by an operculum. An operculum is a pump that is a part that pumps water over the gills. Most of them have an air sac, also called a swim bladder, and this helps to regulate their buoyancy. Basically, if without this, fish would struggle to stay afloat. So air will come into the swim bladder when they need to come up, and then the air will leave the swim bladder when they need to go down. And I'm not even going to attempt to say what the state fish of Hawaii is. That's a really, really long word, but it's really pretty. Ray-finned fish, examples of ray-finned fish are trout, bass, salmon, tuna, about 20,000 others. This is the majority of the place where we find the fish that we know. Now, one of the ways that they protect themselves is to swim in schools. This helps them to avoid predators. So just a final note on fishes. They do have limbs, but they are modified into fins for swimming. Their respiratory is to breathe through gills, and they do lay eggs, but they must be in the water. Now, they are also ectothermic. Now, this term, I don't know if we talked about that in the last category or not, but I wanted to cover what this word means. It's Latin for external temperature. So the simpler term is that they're cold-blooded. That is that they have a body temperature equal to the surrounding environment. Now, you know that fish are cold-blooded if you ever pick one up. They are as cold as the water that they were swimming in. Even if you go swimming and are shivering with cold, you are always warmer than the water. Aquatic means that they spend their lives living in the water. So go ahead and list the three major classes of the fish. And go back and review the function of the operculum in the bony fish. That's important, an important vocabulary word to remember. Okay, another thing about, moving on to amphibians. Amphibians that word means double life. So they live mostly on the land, but they depend on the water for their reproduction. The eggs are laid in the water because they don't have shells and they're going to dry out otherwise. So their reproduction happens in the water, but they live on the land, and that's what amphibian means, is that they are a double life. The characteristics of amphibians that I want you to know is that they are tetrapods. They do have 2 sets of limbs. But unlike the fish that have 2-chambered hearts, amphibians have 3-chambered hearts. They do have lungs that they breathe air through, and they have moist, smooth skin that can allow for some additional gas exchange. Examples here are frogs and salamanders. Now, one of the reasons why we're going to dissect a frog, interestingly enough, is that frogs have most of the organs that we have. So we're not going to dissect a human, so we're going to dissect this frog so we can see the lungs and the heart and blood vessels and muscles and a pancreas and a gallbladder and the small intestines and the large intestines. We'll be able to see all of that in the frog, which are similar parts that. And these are some examples of amphibians: a newt, a salamander, a frog, a caecilian. Now their skin lacks scales, hair, and feathers, because it is now smooth. Now, a frog will have smooth skin, but a toad will have rough skin. They are also dependent upon the moisture, and they can actually dry out if they don't have moisture. They have to be moist in order to help them breathe. They do lay their eggs in the water, and they have that intermittent stage, that life form, which is a tadpole or a larva. They do breathe with gills, but the adult form breathes air and can live outside the water. They also lack claws on their toes. Now, interestingly enough, this little golden poison frog is a dart frog and is endemic to the Pacific coast of Colombia, and it may actually be the most toxic animal on Earth. He's a cute little fella, but not something that you want to bite you. And don't forget that amphibians are cold-blooded as well. This is the smallest little vertebrate on Earth. This little frog was discovered in Papua New Guinea in 2009 by LSU, and he is smaller than the center of that quarter. He is really, really tiny. Okay, explain how amphibians have a double life. Go back and answer that. And then we're moving on to the third class of chordates, and that is reptilia, reptiles. Reptiles include snakes and lizards, turtles, tortoises, crocodiles, and alligators. Now, in my research of reptiles, I discovered that there are these things called legless lizards, and they kind of look like snakes, but they are indeed lizards. Some examples of reptiles: they can live and reproduce on land. Now, we're going to do an exercise in class where I'm going to give you some characteristics, and you're going to need to tell me what class they fall under. Remember that amphibians reproduce in water, but reptiles reproduce on land. And amniote eggs have waterproof shells in which the embryo delivers. They have dry, scaly skin that is waterproof, and they actually have internal fertilization, where that means that the eggs are not fertilized on the outside, but the eggs are fertilized on the inside of the female. They do still have a 3-chambered heart, and this is just an example of a python that's emerging from the egg. Okay, just further on this amniote eggs, this is a bag of water that's surrounding the inside of that egg, and this is what allows that egg to develop on land instead of in water. Okay, and some examples here of reptiles: snakes, turtles, alligators, crocodiles, lizards. Don't forget the legless lizards. You might want to remember that for our classroom activity. And reptiles are still cold-blooded, and they do have scales. They do not have hair or feathers. Scales make up their only covering. And this is just a picture of the largest snake in the world, the green anaconda. And the most venomous snake is found in inland Taipan and is endemic to the central East Australia. It says here that one bite could kill 100 men, and you usually, if you are bitten, may die in as little as 30 minutes. Fierce. Okay, what about the difference between alligators and crocodiles? Well, alligators have a shorter head, kind of more U-shaped. They favor fresh water. They're less aggressive, but, I wouldn't want to encounter either one of them, quite frankly. And alligators are found only in the U.S. and China, where crocodiles are everywhere. And they do have 4 chambered hearts. The crocodile and the alligator have 4 chambered hearts. Okay, so name some of the adaptations of reptiles that enable them to live on land. We mentioned some of them here. And then we're moving on to birds. Okay, birds are the first endothermic or warm-blooded animals that we've talked about in phylum Chordata. They maintain a constant internal temperature regardless of the temperature that's outside. Birds are adapted to flight, so those adaptations that we were talking about, flight is one of them for birds. They also have 4 chambered hearts, and just a few examples: eagles, cardinals, parrots, geese, penguins, the state bird of Washington, the goldfinch, haha, get it, finch. How are they adapted to or for flight? Well, first of all, they have hollow bones, and this is going to keep them lightweight. And then the feathers help them fly as well as stay warm. And don't forget that penguins are flightless birds. And so in our activity that we do, that may kind of come into play. The fastest bird on Earth. The peregrine falcon can dive at speeds of about 200 miles an hour. I would not want to get in that bird's way. All birds lay eggs. They have a hard shell of calcium. The developing embryo receives nutrition from the yolk and the albumin, or the egg white inside. And most birds construct nests and then care for them. So whereas the fish don't care too much for their young, the birds actually do. And it takes about 21 days for an egg to hatch after they are laid. Okay, some more adaptations of birds. They have beaks and feet that are adapted to their particular way of life. Now, there's 4 pictures here, and I want to see if you can identify which bird eats meat and which one eats seeds, and which bird hunts and which one swims. So try to identify a meat eater, a seed eater, a swimmer, and one that hunts on land, just based on the features that you see in these 4 pictures. And we'll talk about this more in class. Okay, define endothermic, and name 2 adaptations of birds that enable them to fly. And these are just some more examples of pretty birds that I wanted to show you. Okay, so don't forget, birds are warm-blooded, they lay eggs, and they have feathers. And real quick, they do have limbs. Most of them have legs, and then their 4 arms or 4 limbs would be their wings. Okay, and the very last class, the 5th class in phylum Chordata, is the mammal. They have hair, they have mammary glands which produce milk for their young, and they are found within the class of Mammalia. There are 3 subclasses: monotremes, marsupials, and placentals. Okay, mammals have few babies. They do have internal fertilization. They have few babies, and they care for them for a long time. So with the monotremes, this is where your platypus is found. They do lay eggs. These are your egg-laying mammals. And there's 2 examples here for monotremes: platypus and echidnas. Then the marsupials, these are your pouched mammals, like the possum and the kangaroo and the wallaby. Their young are born very premature. They move to the pouch and attach to a nipple, and this is where they complete their development as a baby. And then there are the placentals. Most of the mammals are found here in the placentals. Their embryo develops completely inside the mother. They're nourished through that placenta, and the embryo is protected by a membrane called the amnion, or the amniotic fluid. And we saw that word earlier with the reptiles, but that's just that water sac that's inside the egg. Here in the placentals, there's not a developing egg. There's an actual baby in a womb, but we still have that amniotic or that water sac in there to protect the growing fetus. Okay, so name 2 major characteristics of mammals and name the 3 subclasses of the mammals. Okay, I also want you to contrast the number of offspring produced and the level of parental care between fish and mammals. The largest animal on Earth is the blue whale that can reach lengths of 100 feet and weigh over 200 tons. These are just some different further classification of mammals. You have the Cetacea order. These are your mammals that look like fish, but they're really mammals. Order Rodentia. These are your squirrels, possums. Order Chiroptera. This is your flying bat. So at first, if I were to begin to describe some of the features here, it would sound like a bird, but a bat is actually a mammal just by the way that they reproduce. And yes, it may fly, but it doesn't have feathers. It has hair. Order Carnivora. This is where we think of most animals here. Order Insectivora. Your elephants, Proboscidea. Artiodactyla, deer, camels, cows. Perissodactyla, horses, zebras, rhinoceros. Primates, we are found in the primates, monkeys, apes, chimpanzees. Monkeys are primates. There's a difference between New World and Old World. New World monkeys can actually put their weight on their tail, whereas Old World, Africa, Asia, Europe monkeys do not. And don't forget that we are indeed primates. And this is the final classification of a human. Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primates, family Hominidae, and genus Homo sapiens. And this is just a further classification of all of the vertebrates that we have covered today. Okay, so when we come to class, we're going to do an activity where you will use this information. So you'll definitely want to come to class with all of your notes completed, because you're going to need to use them. And then we'll talk about when we'll test over this material, probably not till next week sometime. Okay, have a nice evening.